Oh boy, Doctor Who and the Brain Drain? What could this fun title be all about? It's about dementia. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS and welcome to another Doctor Who Big Finish review as we go back to the Third Doctor adventures with Tim Treloar starring as the Third Doctor. Now the best way to summarise what Big Finish are doing with the Third Doctor at the moment is that we've got basically two separate strands of the character. Currently, you've got an ongoing story arc with the Third Doctor and Jo Jones, played by Tim Treloar and Katie Manning. You've got the return of Jo Jones and you've got the Quintessence stories here, which is essentially the Third Doctor doing much more modern contemporary stories, and the other strand is where you've got the Third Doctor doing much more like 1970s faithful antiquated stories. Stories like The Annihilators, Intelligence for War, Kaleidoscope, Revolution in Space, and the upcoming Operation Vengeance. These stories star Daisy Ashford as Liz Shaw and Sadie Miller as Sarah Jane Smith, and these stories are trying to emulate the sound and the feeling of early 1970s Earthbound Doctor Who with the Third Doctor in unit. But not only that, they're also trying to ape the format and the structure of those stories, with these stories being 6 to 7 parts long. These are lengthy stories, and for stories like Intelligence for War, that can be a real boon, that can be a real benefit, especially if they decide to expand on the characters like Liz Shaw, and also that can be an issue when you've got stories like Revolution in Space. And now with the first Third Doctor release of 2025, we've got Doctor Who and the Brain Drain, with that title basically paying homage to Doctor Who and the Silurians. This stars Tim Treloar as the Third Doctor, we've got Daisy Ashford as Liz Shaw, we've also got John Coleshaw as the Brigadier. This story takes place very early in the Third Doctor's life, to the extent where he doesn't even have Bessie at the moment, so this takes place prior to Doctor Who and the Silurians, so in the canon this could be the Third Doctor's second adventure with UNIT. He's grounded on Earth, he's not able to use the TARDIS, and the Third Doctor, Liz and the Brigadier make their way by train up to Scotland. They've been invited to a symposium at Ben Brannan Castle that's being hosted by the MacLeod family. You've got Abigail, played by Rosalind Lander, and her son Linus, played by Callum Pardo. Abigail's late husband Peter was trying to pioneer research into dementia. He was trying to find a treatment or eventually a cure for dementia. Unfortunately, he ended up succumbing to the condition. And his son Linus has tried to pick up where he's left off, and now they're here to try and show their findings to other scientists. However, before the group even arrive at Ben Brannan Castle, they're on the train journey there, and people start going missing, people start turning up dead, and there's also rumblings and rumours of supernatural mystical creatures around the castle grounds. And things are made even more complicated when the late Peter, played here by Mark Elstop, is communicating to his son Linus from seemingly beyond the grave. It's up to the Doctor, Liz, the Brigadier, and new friend Fiona, played by Susan Harrison, to figure out what is going on and whether or not Peter is actually a benevolent father trying to expand his research through his son, or some sort of corrupted entity.
What's your interest, Dr. Shaw?
Personal and professional. Dementia is such a cruel condition. I had a friend and mentor at university. It took him too soon. It was heartbreaking to watch.
Only a lucky few have escaped its pernicious touch.
Well, believe you me, Professor MacLeod and her crackpot ideas are simply not the cure you're looking for.
Did someone say crackpot ideas?
Doctor.
Sounds just like my sort of conversation.
This is Professor Haber and Dr. Lynch.
How do you do? I'm the Doctor, this is Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart.
How do you do?
Doctor of what?
Oh, practically everything, my dear chap. Now, what's on the menu?
And what are the military doing here?
Just keeping an eye, Dr. Lynch, that's all.
You see how none of this can end well, Dr. Lynch. It never does when the military is involved.
I assure you, Professor.
Excuse me, your fish, sir. And for you, madam, the haggis and whiskey sauce.
When in Rome.
Oh, let's have 3 more of those, shall we? There's a good chap.
Of course, sir.
Look, I applaud Professor MacLeod's aims, really, I do, but some memories are beyond our reach, and with good reason.
But imagine if we had access to them all. If they were as easily retrieved as files in a filing cabinet.
That way lies danger, extreme and irrevocable danger.
It's an interesting idea to base a story around. This one feels a lot more contemporary in terms of like the subject matter of dementia. Not saying that people in the 1970s didn't get dementia, but it wasn't as well understood back in the 1970s or the 1980s. It was referred to as like senility. However, in 2020's Britain, the number one killer of people in this country is dementia, because our population are living longer, they're getting older, and as a result, they're much more susceptible to things like dementia and Alzheimer's. Which is why, despite the brilliant cover art and also the campy title of Doctor Who and the Brain Drain, I was kind of surprised that it did take the subject matter quite seriously, and seeing somebody decay before your eyes mentally for a very lengthy amount of time, it's an incredibly harrowing thing to experience from the outside, and it's definitely difficult for the person who's going through it as well. So I was kind of surprised that Doctor Who and the Brain Drain treated the subject matter with a lot of respect, and I think the MVP of Doctor Who and the Brain Drain is Abigail, played by Rosalind Lander, who is the widow of Peter, and she's brilliant in this story. I think that she really carries like the emotional heft of of somebody who watched the person that they love most experience this. There's a really great montage early on in the story which basically sums up Abigail and Peter's relationship, and it's a really lovely set piece. It's a really lovely sequence of events. And then you get this push and pull, this back and forth of Abigail and Linus, where Linus is talking to his father from beyond the grave, trying to expand his research, trying to push the project forward to try and get funding from the military and try and get funding from other scientists in order to have an earnest cure for dementia. However, Abigail thinks that Linus is going too far and is also worried about his state of mind because she can hear him having conversations with some other entity in his room. It's a really interesting idea, and I think that Doctor Who and the Brain Drain being a 7-part story, it's way too long for the story that it's trying to tell, but because it does have that extra room, it does have that extra time, it allows the audience to essentially be clued in on what Abigail, Linus and Peter are doing. And I think that if this story was shorter, or if it was like an hour-long special or something, you wouldn't have that vantage point which allows the audience to really endear themselves to the supposed villains of the story. And I think that the additional access the audience get to this family unit is the most interesting part about Doctor Who and the Brain Drain. Unfortunately, the rest of the story isn't nearly as interesting. Without getting into spoilers, quite early on in the story, the Third Doctor is essentially removed from the plot for, I think it's like 3 or 4 episodes. He's missing for a massive chunk of this story. And that's not necessarily an issue in and of itself. You do miss Tim Treloar, you do miss the Third Doctor, but there is the potential for interesting stories to be told with an absent Third Doctor, particularly this early on in the unit family dynamic. The story establishes that the Doctor doesn't even have access to Bessie yet, so this is post-Spearhead from Space but pre the Silurians. And when the Third Doctor goes missing, you'd think that maybe Liz and the Brigadier are thinking, wait a minute, we barely know this guy. Is he in on this? Is he, like, playing with us or toying with us? But no, there's very little conflict here, with the Brigadier and Liz going, oh, I'm sure he'll pop up somewhere. I'm sure he's fine. I have the utmost faith in him. And it's like, I don't know if you'd really think that this early on in your relationship with this enigmatic time traveller. Yeah, the Brigadier might have more faith in the Doctor than Liz because he's already met the second incarnation. He's met Patrick Troughton's Doctor in multiple stories, like even more stories than the TV serials, as we've seen from Big Finish. He was in a post-war game story with Patrick Troughton's Doctor. However, Liz should be like, hang on, we don't know this guy. And there's like no conflict here whatsoever. So the story is not really able to progress or move forward because the main vector for the exposition, the main like instigator of all of the conflict and everything happening with moving the plot forward, is missing for several episodes. So it's basically just Liz and the Brigadier wandering around the castle trying to make the plot happen, while Peter, Linus and Abigail are having a dysfunctional family unit and they're maybe the villains. There's just not a lot happening. This could have been a really interesting 4-part story, but at 7 parts, there's just not enough there, which is quite disappointing, especially when you've got the supporting cast with characters like Fiona, who honestly I think are only here because otherwise without Abigail and without Liz, it's just a complete sausage fest. Ben Brannon Castle is an interesting setting. There's some interesting like Scottish folklore stuff going on in the background here, but it is just background detail. Ben Brannon Castle doesn't really feel like an organic living place with an incredibly lengthy and interesting history that's being like divested in this story. There's just not a lot going on in Doctor Who and the Brain Drain, which is a bit, that's a bit of a shame. I think that the cast are really strong, but unlike Intelligence for War, Daisy Ashford doesn't have much to work with as Liz. Tim Treloar, like I said, he's missing for about half of the story, which is a shame. There's just not enough happening with the supporting cast to give characters like the Brigadier anyone to play off of. I can't remember the character's name, but wasn't there a really fun and antagonistic back and forth relationship between the Brigadier and one of the other characters? Was it Sylvia? Who was the character who the Brigadier was really argumentative with in Intelligence for War, who he knew from back in the day? Stuff like that does allow stories of this length to really get in touch with their humanity. Whereas Doctor Who and the Brain Drain, outside of the MacLeod family, there's just not a lot going on here. There's even a big twist in the Part 6 cliffhanger going into Episode 7 revolving around a revelation and a twist surrounding a supporting cast member, but maybe it was just the length of the story, I don't know, but I could not remember who the guy was. It was a big cliffhanger, it was a big revelation. I couldn't remember who the character was. I'm so sorry. That's another risk with a 7-part story. You've got to kind of keep these plates spinning throughout a big portion of it, otherwise it becomes kind of out of sight, out of mind type thing. If you don't see this character for 5 episodes, don't expect the audience to be really invested when they come back at the end of Part 6. I don't know. It's not a complete write-off. Like I said, the performances were really strong, and like I mentioned before, I think that the MacLeod family dynamic, and I think the audience being privy to all of those backroom conversations and really being able to get involved in that drama, that's a really great conceit in this story. But it's not enough to carry it across 7 episodes. While I have enjoyed stories like Intelligence for War and Kaleidoscope, I do think I prefer the traditional volume box sets that they did prior to 2022, where you do have stories like Conspiracy in Space and The Devil's Hoofprints, where you do have the Unzal Incursion and the Gulf, where, you still get 7 or 8 episodes, but they're split amongst 2 stories. You get more variety, and also it means that if one story isn't working for you, the other one might be a significant improvement. With a 7-part story, you're locked into these characters, and in this particular case, you're also locked into this location. This isn't like Kaleidoscope, where it's changing the format of the story midway through. This isn't like the Annihilators, where you've got multiple doctors and companions that you can split apart and work with. For Doctor Who and the Brain Drain, you have this relatively small cast in this relatively small location, and you're there for 7 parts. If you're not engaging with it, too bad. You're here for 7 episodes and you spent nearly 30 quid on this. It starts from an interesting place. I think it had a really good handle on its tone, but that structure is what kills it, and there's just not enough going on in terms of the rest of the characters to sustain the duration. But that was my review of Doctor Who and the Brain Drain. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this box set, or if you enjoyed this review, I want to hear your thoughts on all of it in the comment section down below. Hit the like button, it really helps me out, and subscribe for more Doctor Who Big Finish reviews. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.